Good morning and welcome to our ECO2 Smart Schools Climate Conference for COP29. My name's Devon.
And my name is Hannah, and we are from Oases, an environmental education charity in the northeast of England, UK.
We've just put some instructions in the chat on how to mute notifications so you won't hear a pinging sound every time someone posts a message. So have a look at those instructions and follow those.
We'd love to know who is joining us here today, so please pop your school name and country in the chat bubble at the top of your screen. And we'll say hello to you as you arrive. I know, Devon, we've got lots of schools from around the world, don't we, that have joined us for the conference this year. I know we have had a school from Azerbaijan, which is where COP29 is being held this year.
Yeah, so this morning is our third conference session. We had two yesterday. We've had lots of schools from County Durham join us. We had a school from Dubai, as you said, where COP28 took place. I can say good morning to St. Oswald's C of E Primary School in Durham.
And good morning to Forest School and Crook Primary School as well.
Good morning to the school in Poland. I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to pronounce your school name, but welcome. I think that's #1 young talent school in English.
Yeah, welcome everybody. It's so lovely to have you all joining us today. I know we had schools from France and Spain joining us as well and the other conferences.
Good morning to Eschwinning Academy, just next door to us here in Eschwinning. Welcome to you.
Lots of people joining. Lovely. So I think we'll get started.
Okay. So we're going to begin the conference now. If you lose the feed at any point, if you can see that little red live button at the top left of your screen, if you click on that at any point, it will return you back to us in the real live moment.
And the conference is being recorded, so don't worry if you miss anything. You can view it later when we pop the recordings on YouTube.
Now we're going to go over to a live introductory recording from Professor Simon Abraham of Durham University.
Hello and welcome everybody to this year's ECO2 COP29 Climate Conference. We're absolutely thrilled to have so many schools, teachers and pupils from all around the world, as well as here in County Durham, as part of this conference, which is linked obviously to COP29 in Azerbaijan, which is taking place this week, which I'm sure you're all very well aware of. So I'm Simon Abram. I'm the director of the Durham Energy Institute here at Durham University in Britain. The Energy Institute is an organisation within the university that brings together all of our energy researchers in all different departments, in all different subjects. And it was set up around 15 years ago because we realised that everybody has to be part of this. If we're going to decarbonise, if we're going to address climate change, it can't be just one group of people responsible for it. We're all involved, aren't we? So Durham is very committed, Durham University is very committed to addressing climate change and to making sure that all the important research that we do here at the university goes to the people who need it. So most of our research now is publicly accessible. You can read what we write about, you can see the work that we're doing. And it's really important for us to talk to you about this, to make sure that you understand what we're doing. And that we hear your concerns and we make sure that our research is relevant to what you think is important. So the university has a delegation that has gone to the COP event in Azerbaijan, specifically to make sure that they are well informed, that research is meeting the people who need it. So we're really grateful that you're part of today's event. We're really excited to hear your questions and to try to answer them as best we can. And I'd like to thank all the partners who are supporting this year's conference. That's including the university, including Durham County Council, our colleagues at Oasis and all the other partners who are supporting this. So we're really looking forward to the panels and to meeting you very soon.
Thank you very much, Simone, for opening the conference there. I'll pass over to my colleague Rich Hurst now to tell you all about what's coming up in the agenda today.
Thanks, Hannah, and morning, everyone. Yes, my name's Rich Hurst. I'm Education Advisor for Durham County Council on Sustainability Education. And this is the 4th year that we've run these online sessions here in County Durham, encouraging schools from where we are here and also the wider UK and around the world to be involved. And this session is designed for primary pupils and for overseas pupils who've got a more basic level of English understanding. We're delighted that you're able to join us this morning. And these conferences are organised through something called the ECO2 Smart Schools programme, which supports schools in County Durham to understand how energy is used and then to help them to be more energy efficient in what they are doing, and also potentially to look at issues around broader climate and things like renewables and so on. And these conferences started when the UK hosted COP29 in Glasgow a few years ago. And we believe that it's really important that young people and their teachers can come together from across the globe to share their experiences of climate change, to share their understanding, and also so that we can learn from one another about how it is affecting you. And also importantly, what we can do to try and limit the impacts of climate and adapt to it. So I'm delighted that everyone's here. I'd also like to thank everyone for their hard work in bringing all of these events together. And we really hope that you enjoy the conference today. So taking a look at our agenda, what we're going to do now is that Dovan and Hannah will share a little bit of information around climate change around the world, what it means. You'll then get to meet our expert panelists. We'll then find out a little bit more about COP29, and specifically then from Professor Chris Stokes from Durham University, who is out in COP in Baku at the moment. And then we want to get some questions from you, and then we will, our expert panel will answer them. We'll share some ideas of some innovative climate solutions that are happening around the world now. And then we're going to ask you to pledge climate action as well. And then we'll wrap everything up and we will be finished in around 55 minutes or so. So I hope you enjoy the rest of this session, and back to Hannah and Dovan.
Thank you, Rich. So as Rich mentioned, we've had schools joining us from around the world today and yesterday. And it's been fantastic to see the work that those schools have been sharing. And we've been able to see that climate change is affecting different countries in different ways.
And this is because each country is experiencing different climate change impacts. So some countries like Azerbaijan, for example, where COP29 is currently taking place, they are experiencing water scarcity and drought at some points in the year. And drought is basically when a place has little or no rain, and it can last for days, months, or even years.
Many of you will have seen the dramatic flooding that's hit Spain in the last few weeks, caused when just 1 year's worth of, when 1 year's worth of rain fell in only 8 hours. And scientists predict that extreme weather events like this are only going to become more common because of climate change. In fact, the year 2024 is on track to be the hottest on record, with temperatures 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels for the first time ever.
So climate change does not impact each country equally. Some countries are experiencing more or greater climate impacts than others.
How do you feel about climate change? Put your answer in the word cloud, which should be popping up on your screen now. So try and answer that question. How do you feel about climate change?
How do you feel about climate change, Dovan?
Well, mostly I feel pretty nervous, pretty anxious about climate change, which I think is a normal response, because it can be quite a scary thing to be thinking about when you see all of the impacts happening on the news. But I know what helps me is feeling like I'm taking an action, even if it's only a small action. If I feel like I'm doing my bit, that helps me feel a bit better about it.
Definitely, I agree. I think seeing action that other people are taking around the world, innovative, interesting climate solutions really inspires me and gives me hope that we can tackle the climate crisis. I think it's normal to feel a little bit anxious. I certainly do sometimes as well.
Yeah, so I'm looking at your responses now, and we've got quite a mix of answers there, from worried, concerned, and then some answers more frustration, anger about what's happening with the climate.
Emotional as well. I think it's normal to feel lots of different emotions when you're thinking about climate change and how we can tackle it as well.
Well, we are going to hear a lot of positive stories and
Absolutely.
examples around the world today. So hopefully that will give everyone a bit more cause for optimism.
Definitely. So now we're going to meet the expert panel who will be answering your questions today. If you want to get the word cloud off your screen, you can just click the little cross in the top right-hand corner on it and it will disappear. So, panel, we'll ask you one by one. Please could you tell us your name and what you do, and try and keep it in a sentence if possible. There's a challenge. If we could go to Chris Stokes first.
Hi everybody, my name's Professor Chris Stokes and I work in the Geography Department at Durham University, and I'm a climate scientist who is at COP29 in Azerbaijan.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Okay, if we could go to Stephen next.
Hello everybody, my name's Stephen MacDonald. I'm the Net Zero Manager for Durham County Council, so it's mine and my team's responsibility to try and help Durham Council and County Durham reduce its greenhouse gas emissions as quickly as possible.
Thank you. And could we hear a little bit from Stuart?
Good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm Dr. Stuart Jones. I'm a member of academic staff in the Department of Earth Sciences here at Durham University. I'm a geologist, so I study rocks and fossils to actually try to understand the past, but hopefully try to model the future and understand how the rocks could be utilised for potential energy storage and combating climate change.
Fantastic, thank you. And if we've got any other remaining panelists, if they could introduce themselves as well, please. Okay, I think that's everyone that's here for now. We might have some more panelists joining us later. So thank you very much, panel.
So now is the time. If you have any questions on climate change and climate justice that you would like to put to our expert panel to hear their answers, please put them into the chat now.
You can post your questions by clicking on the chat button, and please remember to also add in the name of your school so we know who is asking the question. So whilst your teacher writes your climate change and climate justice questions in the chat, we're going to talk to you a little bit more about COP29, which is happening currently.
Every year, countries from all around the world come together to talk about climate change. The first COP, COP1, took place in Berlin, in Germany, in the year 1995.
And we've had 28 more COPs since then. And each COP has a different theme and a focus for the countries to discuss. Countries are also measured on their progress against climate targets that they were set in previous COPs. So, for example, have they managed to reduce the amount of carbon that they produced since the last COP?
COP29 is currently taking place in Baku in Azerbaijan. And it's a bit like a really big school council meeting with world leaders from countries all around the world listening to scientists, trying to come up with a plan to tackle climate change.
One of the main themes of this year's COP is finance, or in simple terms, money. And climate change can be expensive. Countries need money to deal with the impacts of climate change, such as when there are storms or flooding, roads and houses and buildings might get damaged, and they need money to be able to repair them. Countries also need money to be able to build climate solutions, such as wind turbines or solar panels that produce clean energy.
But we know that the impacts of climate change aren't equal all around the world. Some countries are experiencing much worse impacts from the changing climate, like flooding, storms, and droughts, and therefore they're needing to spend more money to prepare for these impacts and to repair the damage caused.
Some countries have more money than others to spend on the climate impacts and developing and building solutions as well. But it's often the countries with the least money who are experiencing the worst climate impacts.
Now, is this fair? What do you think? So have a look at the statement on your screen. All countries should help equally to fix climate change. Do you agree or do you disagree with that statement? So a poll question is now going to appear on your screen, and try and answer that question. Do you agree that all countries should help equally to fix climate change? Hannah, what do you think?
It's a tough question, isn't it? But I think personally it's important that all countries play a role in fixing climate change. However, I don't think it's fair that some countries have to spend more because they are experiencing more climate impacts. What do you think, Devin?
Oh, yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think also there's an important role that businesses and companies, like the oil and gas companies, that are causing so much of the greenhouse gas emissions that are causing climate change, I think they could play a part in paying for the damage from the effects of climate change.
Yeah, so I can see you've been posting in the chat, thank you. So I can see we've got some schools agreeing with that statement that yes, all countries should help equally to fix climate change. That's more the majority at the moment. But some schools disagreeing, thinking maybe all countries should help to fix climate change, but they should pay a proportionate amount of money depending on how much wealth they have.
So thank you for sharing your opinion there. Back to COP29. Now, many scientists and many world leaders who care about the climate are worried because they don't think that enough is being done at COP meetings to help with the climate.
Some people are worried about the influence that oil and gas companies are having on the choices being made at COP. These companies make a lot of money from selling fossil fuels like oil, gas, and coal, which we know release carbon when they are burned. But these companies may be more interested in making money than saving the planet.
Now, we're very lucky this morning that we're going to hear from our own correspondent, Professor Chris Stokes, who is in Baku at COP29. Hello, Chris.
So hi, Chris. Please, can you explain who you are and what you're doing at COP in Baku?
Yeah, so my name's Chris Stokes and I work in the geography department at Durham University. And I'm a climate scientist, so I look at climate and how it's changed in the past. And I'm particularly interested in how the climate affects icy environments on Earth. So the polar regions like the Arctic and the Antarctic, and what's happening to the ice there, because all of our observations from the scientists show that the ice is melting and it's actually causing sea levels to rise. So we've had it explained to us that COP is a conference of the parties where all of these parties, and that means the countries, all the countries in the world, that's nearly 200 countries, are here at this meeting. But it's not just the countries that are allowed to come to COPs, because there are other people who are allowed to come along, and they're also allowed to input into some of the negotiations and share what they know about climate change to help the governments make the best decisions. So I'm here at COP this week sharing some of the scientific results that we've got from some of the observations we've been taking, particularly of the polar regions.
Thank you, Chris. Have you been to any previous COP meetings before COP29?
Yes, I have. I've been to the last two COPs. So I went to COP27, which was in Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt, and I also went to COP28 last year, which was in Dubai.
Great. And I can see there's lots of action happening behind you. There's lots of people moving around. So who have you seen or talked to at COP so far?
So this is the fourth day of COP, and COP lasts for 2 weeks. And the first two and a half days of COP is what's called the World Leaders Summit. So that's when all of the countries, often their presidents or their senior ministers, will come along to COP and they'll make their opening statements on what their country is doing about climate change. For some leaders, it's about being very ambitious and saying that they're going to cut their pollution of greenhouse gases. For other leaders, they might come along and say, this is how we're being affected by climate change. Please, you must take action as quickly as you can. So it's been quite exciting over the last few days to see some of the world leaders just walking around in the venue. I happened to be in a room with the UK's Prime Minister 2 days ago, which was very interesting. And you see lots of people that you recognise from the television or you recognise from the newspapers or online. So it's very exciting. There's lots of energy and there's lots of optimism as well at the moment.
Has anything been decided yet at this year's COP?
Okay, so that's a really good question. I said COP lasts for 2 weeks, and sometimes it lasts even longer than that. Sometimes if the negotiations between the countries haven't reached any decisions, they just keep talking to each other until they can reach some decisions. Now, it's very, very early days in a COP at the moment. So lots of countries are coming and they're giving their statements on what they would like to see done, but they've not reached any agreements just yet. Okay, so you'll have to wait maybe another few days, maybe even a week or more before we hear about some of the decisions being made. But I will say that a real focus, and you said this earlier, a real focus of COP this year is on finance. It's particularly important, people are saying, that countries that are worst affected by climate change are often the poorest countries who are least able to adapt or maybe to invest and use renewable energy instead of fossil fuels. And so lots of the discussions in the next week or so will be about how can some of the richer countries provide funding and money to some of the poorer countries to combat climate change and also to adapt to climate change as well.
Thank you, Chris. That's really interesting. So what hopes do you have then for progress that could be achieved at COP29? Is it to do with finance, or are there some other hopes that you have as well?
Yeah, so I think lots of people are hoping that there'll be some really clear financial commitments at this COP, that countries will step up and say, yes, we will provide funding to some of the poorer countries. Another important thing that will happen at this COP is that countries have to lay out their plans for what they're going to do about climate change, particularly how they're going to reduce their emissions. That means the greenhouse gases that help the earth warm up, how they're going to cut it. So some countries have already made their decisions. The United Kingdom has come out with a very ambitious plan in the last few days, where they're going to cut their emissions by nearly 80% compared to 1990 levels and try and reach net zero. That's when we don't really add any new extra emissions to the atmosphere by 2050. Brazil also made a strong statement yesterday. So the two things, there'll be the finance decisions, but hopefully there'll be lots of countries making their pledges as to what they're going to do to cut their emissions.
Thank you very much, Chris. So I can see some schools have been doing this already, but after learning more about COP and hearing from Chris, what would you like to see happen at COP29? Share your answers either in the chat or in the word cloud that will pop up on your screen now.
Yeah, and like you said, Hannah, we've got some great answers to that already. So number one Young Talent School in Poland said they would like to see the countries that hurt our planet the most pay for it.
Byerley Park Primary School, they say for climate change to stop, by the leaders to agree and take action. So they want the leaders to do something about it.
Lord's Doncel Barrientos School, apologies for my pronunciation, say we should gather our efforts and reach a common answer to solve this problem. Absolutely, that's what we hope is happening at COP.
Absolutely. I can see another school saying they want all countries to work together. So again, hopefully that happens at COP. And South Hatton Primary would like to see these improvements and changes starting to happen. I think I would like to see at COP28 last year, it was decided that a youth ambassador will be chosen for every COP. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Leila Hassanova, the youth ambassador for COP29, because she will share the views of young people all around the world. So I really hope the leaders listen to those views that she's sharing. What about you, Donovan?
Yeah, I think I would just echo what Chris and so many of the schools are sharing, that I would like to see some of those countries who are wealthier and have caused more of the greenhouse gas emissions that are causing climate change. I would really like to see those countries step up and pay in to this big global fund, a big pot of money that can help some of the less developed, less wealthy countries that are suffering the most from these terrible impacts of climate change that we are seeing. And I would just remind everyone, when you're posting in the chat, if you could please put where you're posting from, that really helps us.
Yeah, then we can give you a shout out when we read out your questions or answers. So thank you for submitting your climate change and climate justice questions earlier. We're now going to ask some of them to the panel. So I think I'll start with this one, and Chris, it's probably a question for you. It's from Crook Primary, and they ask, if we don't do anything, will the polar regions flood the world?
Well, that's a really good question. That's actually exactly what I've been trying to tell some of the climate negotiators and policymakers and ministers here at COP, because we're really worried at the moment, actually. We're seeing both the Antarctic ice sheet, this big ice cap at the South Pole, and also the Greenland ice sheet, which is close to the North Pole. We're seeing them lose lots of ice, and that's actually topping up sea level by quite a large amount. And we're particularly worried because our computer simulations show that we'll probably add about 1 meter to sea level by the end of this century. So in many of your lifetimes, children, the sea level would increase by 1 meter. And that's something that maybe we can just adapt to, maybe, best case. But actually, we're really worried that if we keep warming the planet, that number's going to go up and up and up. And some really, really scary numbers sometimes, a long time in the future, that we could see 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 meters of sea level rise. So this is why it's so urgent that we take action as quickly as possible.
Thank you for that answer. Now I've got a question from Scholar Podstavova, and their question is, which country is the most responsible for the effects of climate change? So which country or which countries are the most responsible for the impacts of climate change we're seeing? Who on the expert panel would like to go with that one? Chris again, thank you.
Yeah, so that's a question I get asked a lot, actually. And if you want a simple answer, it would be China, because China have an awful lot of people and they burn a lot of fossil fuel, and they have the highest number of what we call greenhouse gas emissions. However, I would say it's not quite so simple, because there are other countries, for example, that might provide oil and gas for other countries to use and burn for their energy systems. And that's where we see countries kind of exporting the problem to other countries. So I'll say China's the simple answer, but it's actually much more complicated than that to just blame 1 or 2 countries. And I would also add that whilst China has historically in the past been the largest emitter, they are actually one of the leading countries now in terms of developing, for example, electric cars and renewable technology. So they're doing a lot about it as well.
Thank you, Chris. I've got a question from Byerley Park Primary, and I know we've got a few schools joining us from County Durham today in England, and they've asked, will climate change affect Durham? Because we're not seeing as great climate impacts as some places around the world currently, but they're wondering, will or is it already affecting Durham? Stephen.
I should take this one. Oh, sorry, microphone wasn't on. I should take this one. So, yes, the climate is already climate change is already affecting County Durham. We've seen that with the storms that we've had more recently. Now, a storm in itself isn't necessarily an impact of climate change, but it's the amount of storms that we're having and the intensity, how bad the storms are. So we've seen that across a number of years. With the amount of storms and how bad they've been. So things like that can have a massive impact. We've also had periods of really high temperatures in County Durham. I know it hasn't felt like that this year. We've had a very cold summer, but we've had some in the past few years. We've had some really high temperatures, and we can see that with the data that we got. We've got excellent types of data, and we can measure all these different impacts that we've had over the past few years. Things like flooding. We've had lots and lots of flooding events. Thankfully, not as bad as what Spain has had over the past few weeks, but we have had those periods of really intense rainfall that has impacted upon towns and villages in County Durham. So yes, absolutely, you are already seeing those impacts.
Thank you for that answer, Stephen. Now I've got a question from Forest School in the UK, and they ask, how can we spread awareness of developing countries being affected the worst by climate change? How can we spread awareness of developing countries who are being the worst affected by climate change? Would anyone like to come in on that one? But I suppose partly what we're doing this morning is helping to raise awareness of some of the countries being worst affected.
It is, and I think there's a lot of developing countries generally will be impacted a lot more by the impacts of climate change. So in the West, in countries like the UK, we have a lot more resources to be able to adapt to those changes. In countries, especially lower-lying countries, developing countries, the impact of climate change could be significantly worse, and they haven't got the infrastructure to be able to deal with things like that. So you take some of the forest fires in Canada that are dealt with, that they have every year. They deal with them very well. They're used to them. You have forest fires in a developing country. They haven't got the helicopters to go over and to put these fires out. So you do see that on the news, and I think we all have a part to play in especially in the media and in government, to recognize the impacts that developing countries these impacts are having on developing countries. So it's a great question, and yeah, it's on everybody to really say what those impacts are and how that's impacting more on developing countries than developed countries.
Thank you, Stephen. I'll close this section of the panel with one more kind of combined question from a couple of schools, so South Hetton Primary and Forest School as well. And they're saying, we know that climate change has different effects on countries around the world. So how do you think governments and leaders can best work together to tackle climate change? It's a big question.
That is a really good question. I think that touches on a really important point, actually, because these COP meetings, they don't always, not everybody agrees that they actually make much difference. Some people say that actually they're a bit of a waste of time because it's so hard to reach agreement. But I would strongly disagree, actually, because I think this is the one main way in which countries talk to each other. They explain the problems that they're having, and they can make plans together, and they can encourage each other to do something about it. So I would think the best way, actually, we can do this, in answer to that really great question, is that we need to get countries together. We need to get countries together talking to each other about how they're experiencing climate change and what they can do about it. So I think COPs are the answer to that question, actually.
Thank you. Stuart, did you have something to add there as well?
Yeah, I was going to add to Chris there, in that actually it's by working together is the way forward. We need to be able to think about how we can actually provide opportunities for renewable and low carbon energy technologies to combat climate change in the way forward. And we can't just do that alone, either here in County Durham or in a singular place somewhere else in the world. We need to be operating together. It's a global factor that we have to combat together by providing these sorts of new low carbon technologies to combat the rise in CO2. And we've got some urgency to do that. We do have the science and technology to do it, though. But we need to push that out faster than we're currently doing, and that's where we need the governments to be working together.
Thank you, Stuart. We'll go over to Queen at Durham University, who would like to come in on this question.
Maybe we're having some technical difficulties. We'll have another panel session later, so maybe Queen can share their thoughts then.
Definitely. So thank you, panel, for all of your answers to those brilliant and very challenging questions, some of those.
Yeah, so our panel, they're not just experts in climate change and climate justice, they also know a lot about solutions to climate change.
So if you've got any questions on the solutions to this climate crisis, could you ask them in our chat now, and you'll get to hear one more round of answers from our expert panel on solutions to climate change.
Excellent. So whilst your teacher posts your questions in the chat about climate solutions, let's find out about some climate solutions that are being used and have been recently developed around the world.
Because the good news is there are lots of people all around the world who really care about our planet and looking after the climate. So we'll start with you, Hannah, talking about Medellin.
So Medellin is a city in Colombia, and they were really worried about rising temperatures and air pollution levels in their city. So they planted millions of small plants and hundreds of thousands of trees since 2016, and they've planted these all around their city, so along streets, on hills and parks. And these green corridors have reduced the temperature in the city by an average of 2 degrees. They've cleaned the air, and they've even helped bring wildlife back into parts of the city.
Next up, you can see a photo on your screens now of Alok Shukla, and he was an Indian, or he is an Indian environmental campaigner who heard about plans for the Indian government to build 21 coal mines in an area of beautiful forest where he lived in India. And he organized local people to get together to oppose these plans, and they were able to stop the building of these coal mines, and he was able to save, for the community, all by working together, were able to save 445,000 acres of forest from being taken over by coal mines. And that saved the habitat for 25 endangered species, such as elephants, leopards, and sloth bears.
Oh, what a great example of communities coming together and taking action and it having an impact. So Mysohab create mushroom bricks in Namibia. So in Namibia, they were noticing that there was a species of plant growing that isn't meant to grow in Namibia. It had accidentally been brought in. And that invasive species of plant stops other plants that naturally grow in Namibia from growing there. And those plants that naturally grow in Namibia are needed by the local wildlife for food and shelter. So what Mysohab have decided to do is they're removing that invasive species, of plant, they're grinding it down, and then they're using that to grow mushrooms in. It's food for the mushrooms. And the local people are eating the mushrooms or selling them. And then the leftover waste is compacted into strong bricks, which can then be used to build houses, which I think is really cool.
Amazing. Next up, we've got an example from Azerbaijan, where COP29 is taking place. And this is a massive new solar power station that the government there has built. And it's got enough solar panels covering the hills just outside the capital city of Baku. And there's enough solar panels there to power 110,000 homes with electricity. And this is part of the Azerbaijani government's promise to increase renewable energy by 30% by 2030.
Excellent. I can see the school from Poland have asked, are the mushrooms safe on the last slide? And yes, they're edible mushrooms and the people have the proper equipment to be able to farm them as well. So another example of an innovative climate solution is Forest Guard 2.0, which was developed in Turkey. And this small solar powered device is an early alarm warning system for forests. So each device can monitor 25,000 trees. And if it detects any changes in the temperature or the humidity of the forest, which indicate that a wildfire might be likely, it sends out an early alert to firefighters and local authorities to let them know to prepare. Okay, so it's a great solution and really affordable as well.
And our final case study is one from Poland, where Olga and her team have developed these printable solar cells. And these are really amazing because they're super thin, super lightweight, super flexible, so they can cover almost any surface. And they use a material known as perovskite to generate energy, meaning because of how lightweight and thin this material is, it can cover almost any surface and mean you can be generating electricity almost anywhere you go.
How exciting. So we're now going to ask your questions on climate solutions to the panel. So I think I'll start with a question from Byerley Park. And they ask, how are we going to pay for things like wind turbines if they are so expensive? Because we know they're a good solution for generating clean energy, but how are we going to pay for them?
If I can start that one off, actually wind turbines aren't really expensive. If you look at things like wind turbines and solar PV, which is the two most abundant renewable energy technologies, they're actually now the cheapest forms of energy generation that there is. So they're cheaper than gas-fired power stations, they're cheaper than coal-fired power stations, they are cheaper than nuclear. So the problem is obviously with wind and solar, they are intermittent. So the wind turbines only go around when the wind blows, and solar panels only produce energy when the sun shines. So we do need a mix of different technologies. But in terms of how much they cost, they're actually really, really cheap now. And solar panels, the prices of solar panels have come down for loads over the past 10 years. So when they first came on the market, they were quite expensive, and they've come down so much, especially in the West, over the past 10 years, because there's been so many more people who are making them. And obviously in the UK and wind turbines, that's why we're seeing so many more wind turbines being developed, especially out in the sea, offshore wind turbines. We've got miles and miles of wind turbines that are being developed in the North Sea at the moment.
Yeah. Adding to that, oh, we had a bit of an echo. We'll maybe be able to hear soon.
I tell you what, should we go to the next question? whilst we try to sort out the sound problems
Yes.
at the university. So the next question is from Poland, from Number One Young Talent School. And they very simply ask, who is going to fix for all of this mess? Or who's going to pay for all of that mess? Sorry.
Okay.
Who would like to have a go answering that
Is
one?
the sound working?
Oh, that
Sorry,
again,
go on,
that's
Chris.
sorry, that's a really, really good question again, isn't it? And who's going to pay for all of this? Well, that's exactly what's trying to be decided at this COP. We don't know. I think lots of people agree that if you're a rich country and you've been mostly responsible for the pollution and the greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere, that you should pay more money than a country that hasn't contributed to the problem but is feeling the worst effects. So hopefully that will be agreed at this COP, and I'd encourage you to look out for the outcomes of this on the television, in the news, on websites, and see what happens. Or ask your teachers what happened at the end of COP, and we'll find out the answer to that question.
While we're waiting for the big money, we also pay individually across our different communities as well. So by making certain decisions, trying to do new things, adopting new practices, it's also a way of us paying too, as we are all hoping to have a more secure future for all. So
fantastic, thank you. So I'll ask our next question from Forest School, and they ask, what can communities do to support and learn from each other when it comes to tackling the climate crisis? Maybe how can they support and learn from each other? Stuart.
I think communities need to come together and work together on this. And I think in many places, we've always thought individually about how we approach our use of energy, especially, which is one of and heating our homes or turning the light switches on. We're all very isolated on that. We're all very happy to do it. But we need to come together as a community. And a good example where County Durham is leading away is looking at shallow coal mine geothermal, whereby vastly polluting coal has been mined from County Durham and it's given rise to lots of the emissions. But now we're reversing that practice and using the former coal mines for geothermal energy. But to make that really profitable and make that actually useful for going forward, we need to think about them as domestic heating networks and bring together people from a central heat hub that actually extracts the heat. So rather than having individual heating systems in houses, we need to come together as a bigger community and take a different approach to the problem than what we're currently doing.
Thank you, Stuart. Queen, would you like to come in on this question?
Yes, I will. Yes, no doubt. We have some indigenous practices that communities over time have been doing. So we shouldn't just throw those away, just like you said earlier. It's just refining them. And also what communities, there should be also be platforms for sharing experiences, in as much as each community have their specific problems, for instance, but sometimes these things cut across. So sharing these experiences and the learning outcomes too would help.
Thank you for those answers. Another question now from Forest School in England, and they ask, what things could schools do to lessen the impact of climate change?
Happy to come in on this one as well. I mean, schools can do so much, and I think some of those comments that have just been put down in the chat there as well. You know, things like turning off lights, walking, encouraging people to walk to school. What about doing something different as well? Having to think about menus, because one of the key parts around emissions is actually what people eat. And having, in the West, we have a very sort of big meat-based diet, and encouraging menus to be more plant-based. That might be an idea. I'm going to pass over to Rich Hurst, because I think Rich is eager to get in here, seeing as he is our education advisor.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, I'm jumping on to the expert panel. I hope people don't mind. But yes, what we need to think about really from our point of view in schools is to think about what are the things that we can control from a school point of view. What are the things that we can do something about, whether we are pupils, teachers, caretaking staff, and focus on those things. So there are simple things that we can do in the school, things like trying to reduce the temperatures in schools slightly to make sure that they aren't overly hot. We can do that through changing our boilers. We can all make those simple changes that we can do individually about whether we switch off light boards, lights in classrooms, etc., when we're not using them. All of those are just small changes that incrementally add up. And if all of those across in our schools in County Durham and around the world made those small changes, they will add up. But one of the big things we can do is really think about, as Stephen was mentioning about food, is generally thinking about what we are consuming, what stuff we use, what we buy. That has a huge impact in terms of the emissions that are used to make it, to transport those things that we use, and then what we do with them afterwards. So the more that we think about how we use things, consume things, that's what will make a really big difference and within our school communities. And also, of course, the key thing is talking to one another and sharing what we think and sharing our good experiences. That can really make a difference, not only in our school, but across our wider communities.
Thank you, Rich. Was there any other panelists that would like to share? Queen?
Yes, I think the schools are doing a great job already for them to even have such platforms where we're having these conversations. So they can also go a step further by engaging the parents as well. So what they are teaching the students, what they are teaching the students, for instance, turning off tap, white brushing, turning off the lights, bulb, all these things. Also, they can step further by engaging the parents on other renewable sources, energy sources that they can also leverage. So it's just creating this information, passing them, working hand in hand with the Durham County Council.
Thank you. I'll ask one more question, and it was, what careers do we want to go into if we want to help? Would you recommend your job? Like maybe some panelists could tell us a little bit more about what you do, and whether you'd recommend it as a green career for the future. Stuart?
Okay, well, I suppose I come from a background of working in the oil industry, so you could hold me responsible in some respects, but I've seen the light and I've changed my ways, and I now work with energy companies that look at geothermal, extracting heat from the earth. They require a whole array of staff to be able to extract that heat. I work with wind farm companies, UK based and abroad, which are building in the offshore UK, are building some of the largest wind farms in the world. Hopefully going to be powering many millions. I think the latest wind farm offshore Hull is going to be powering about 6 million homes from the Hornsea project. I'm also looking at how we combat, actually, we're not stopping burning fossil fuels, and there's a need for people to look at how we actually sequester or take CO2 out of the Earth's atmosphere and lock it up into the subsurface, and the rocks are a great place where we can lock up that CO2 for a protracted period of time, much older than your grandparents. So we're talking here hundreds, if not thousands of years, we want to lock that CO2 up for. And that's called carbon capture and storage, and the UK government have just announced £22 billion to invest into that. And it's controversial because some people think that money should be invested in other new green renewable energy resources. But last week in the UK, there was 3 days when there was no wind or solar power generated, and most of it came from gas. And so we need to think of ways how we can combat that as we undergo this transition. Because while we build up the pace of making this change, we need to have other preventive measures in place. And there's lots of employment involved in those areas, which hopefully some of you would actually like to get involved with and make a difference.
Thank you. Any other panelists? Queen, I think you're on mute, but...
Oh, damn. So over here, we look at how climate change affects children, affect maternal and child health. So ranging either mental, either physical, emotional, all around. So that's what we look at. And yes, there's also a lot of opportunities that you can explore in this on this side on how you can sensitize others too, can also fit in here too. Yeah.
Rich?
Just very quickly, I think in the future, by the time the young people here on the call today are in the world of work, all jobs will have a sustainability and climate element to them. We will need to be taking account of that for everything that we are doing, whether you're involved in healthcare, childcare, whether you are involved in computing, whatever it may be. You don't have to necessarily think about being an engineer or those things. They will all have a climate aspect in them going forward, and we need to take account of that as we are moving our way through the school system and potentially maybe going on to further education or even university. So that's all I would want to leave it with there. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, panel, for those answers. I found it really interesting and I learned a lot. So I know the schools will have as well.
Absolutely. And up on your screen, we've had the opportunity for your schools to share a pledge that you can make against climate change. And we've had some fantastic pledges coming in that we'll share. Very quickly, I will say that my pledge for this coming year is to ride a bicycle to the work office more often. So I'm not driving and burning petrol.
And I was inspired by the community action that Alok Shukla took in India about his local forest. So I've got an area near my house of very empty, open green space. So I'd like to speak to my local council about planting it up with trees. So let's have a think about, or as you come up with maybe some more pledges, we'll just have a quick look at some of the work that you've been doing, and then we'll share your pledges at the end. So as you can see on this map, we've had loads of schools joining us this year across our 3 conferences today and yesterday. So Devon, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, so first of all, we've got the International Montessori School in Baku in Azerbaijan, who sent us these photos of these amazing posters they've created showing the different impacts of climate change around the world.
Fantastic. And hello to number 1 Young Talents Primary School in Poland, who I know are on the call today. And we loved seeing your climate justice poems. I really enjoyed reading them. They were fantastic. And posters with some of the solutions that you'd like to see to the climate crisis as well. It's fantastic work, so well done.
Next up, Nettlesworth Primary School, who were at the conference yesterday, who have planted and have been looking after loads of young tree saplings that you can see in that photo. And as those trees grow, they're going to be absorbing CO2, which is going to help in the fight against climate change.
In Lacy-la-Providence in Amiens in France, they've shared these photos of their class learning about the different natural factors that can change the climate. But then they compared that with how the climate has changed since the industrial times and why that has been so different.
Finally, Jamnabai Narseh School in India. They've got a climate warriors group who have been having debates on climate justice. They've been doing presentations to the whole school, and they've been conducting interviews with local people who are taking climate action.
Fantastic. So we'll read out some of your pledges because they're really, really good. So I'll start with a pledge from Forest School, and they say they're going to have a meat-free Wednesday, which is great. And they have already achieved a Gold Sustainability Award, which is fantastic. So keep going with what you're doing.
Fantastic. Crook Primary School say they pledge to ensure that as a school they are recycling properly and monitoring energy usage in classrooms.
That's great, because if you're recycling materials, we don't have to put lots of energy and get other resources out the ground. So fantastic. It's always good to reuse and reduce what we're using.
Absolutely. I've got another pledge now from Forest School, who say they will always try to limit all of their waste, spread awareness about the impacts, and encourage sustainability in our community.
Los Doncel Barrientos, so they will use public transport, recycle, not drop litter everywhere, and use electricity only when necessary.
One here from Byerley Park School who pledged to turn off lights when they're not used, turn off appliances when they're not being used, try to walk to school if they can. They're going to put up posters about climate change around the school, and they say that they're now eating corn burgers instead of meat at school.
And I'll finish with 2 pledges. So one from South Hetton Primary, who pledged to walk to school where possible. That's great, instead of taking the car. And Number 1 Young Talent School in Poland. They said they will try to teach children to follow an eco lifestyle and spread awareness. So thank you, everyone, for sharing your pledges.
Now we'll go back over to Rich Hurst from Durham County Council to close today's conference.
Thank you, Dovan. Thank you, Hannah. I just want to thank everybody who's been to the session today. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us. Particularly like to thank all of our expert panelists, and big thanks as well to Hannah and Dovan for holding the show together, and also behind the scenes, Sean, for sorting out the technology. So thank you, everybody. Remember, of course, that these sessions are being recorded. They will be up on the Oasis YouTube channel next week if you want to come back and look at them. And if you want to look at any previous conferences that we've held, they're already on the Oasis YouTube channel. Thank you, everyone. We'd hope to see you again at future events, and take care.
So thank you so much, everyone, for coming to our ECO2 COP29 climate conference. It's been so inspiring to hear all of your stories, all of your questions, and all of your pledges.
And I'll say a big thanks again to the panel, and we wish you best of luck, schools, with all your pledges of action. We really love hearing what you've been up to, because we hold these conferences each year. So keep letting us know between them what action you're taking. You can email us at eco2smartschools@oasis.org.uk.
And we haven't had time to answer all of your questions today, but if you have a look on our website in the coming weeks, that's eco2smartschools.org.uk, we'll put together an answer for the questions we didn't have time for today.
And any posts on social media, please hashtag ECO2COP29. So thank you.
And goodbye.
All right. Bye.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.